Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, September 28th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 78 degrees, with a low of 65.3 degrees, so expect a mild fall day perfect for getting out and about. Coming up on the show, we'll examine the motivations behind President Trump's move to send troops to Portland amid ongoing unrest, and break down how his administration's budget cuts are severely affecting public media outlets in California. Plus, we'll cover other key developments from around the nation and the world, including updates on international tensions and local innovations. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. In our top story this morning, President Trump has stirred the pot once again with a bold announcement about sending troops to Portland, Oregon. This comes just yesterday on September 27th, 2025, and it's sparking fierce debate over federal overreach and local protests. Joining me now from our newsroom is our political correspondent, Ethan, who's been digging into the details. Ethan, break this down for us, starting with what exactly the president said.
Thanks, Grace. Well, President Trump, in his second term after that January 20th inauguration earlier this year, took to his Truth Social platform yesterday to declare he's deploying U.S. military troops to Portland. He called the city, quote, war-ravaged, end quote, and said it's under siege by Antifa and other domestic terrorists targeting immigration enforcement spots, like ICE facilities. According to reporting from PBS NewsHour, he directed the Department of Defense, led by Secretary Pete Hegseth, whom he nicknamed, quote, Secretary of War, end quote, to provide all necessary troops and even authorized full force if needed. It's like he's turning up the heat on what he sees as chaos there.
That sounds intense, Ethan. For folks who might not follow every twist in Portland's story, what's the backstory on these protests? And why Portland specifically?
Absolutely, Grace. Portland, with its 636,000 residents, has been a sanctuary city, meaning it limits cooperation with ICE on immigration stuff to protect folks who aren't criminals. Protests kicked off in early June 2025, focused on that ICE detention center on Southwest Macadam Avenue outside downtown. They've been against raids and detentions, and yes, some have turned rowdy, per Oregon Public Broadcasting's coverage. DHS reports attacks on the building, injuries to agents, and by September 8th, federal charges against 26 people for things like arson and assaulting officers. There was even a prop guillotine erected outside, which DHS called unhinged, and Rose City Antifa, a loose far-left group, got accused of doxing officers and death threats. But here's the punny part, Grace. It's not all fire and fury. The on-the-ground scene yesterday morning was pretty chill, as PBS NewsHour described quiet streets around the boarded-up, graffitied facility, no protesters in sight.
Chill and calm amid the claims of a hot zone, got it. Trump recently designated Antifa as a major domestic terrorist organization by executive order this week, right? But I hear there are legal snags there.
Spot on. BBC News, in their article from about 14 hours before our broadcast, highlighted how Trump portrays Portland as a war zone thanks to Antifa. But legal experts they cited say there's no easy way for a president to slap a terrorist label on a domestic group without Congress, and it could trample First Amendment rights to speech and assembly. Antifa, for the uninitiated, is this decentralized far-left movement, often protesting fascism and police. But it's not like a formal organization with headquarters. Trump's rhetoric ramped up after the September 10th assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, which he and Republicans blame on radical left violence.
And this isn't out of nowhere for Portland. How does it fit Trump's bigger pattern?
It sure does, Grace. This echoes his 2020 deployments like Operation Legend and Pact, sending hundreds of DHS Customs and Border Protection and marshals in unmarked vans to guard the courthouse during George Floyd protests, which caused major backlash. More recently, summer 2025 saw National Guard and Marines to Los Angeles for migrant raid clashes and troops to Washington, D.C. for crime. He's even threatened Chicago. Now, similar moves in Democratic-led cities like L.A. and D.C. critics, per The Guardian and AP News, see it as partisan jabs at the, quote, radical left, end quote.
Speaking of reactions, what's the local pushback? Portland and Oregon aren't taking this lying down.
Not at all. Democratic Mayor Keith Wilson said flat out yesterday that the number of necessary troops is 0 in Portland, Oregon, any city, warning it could spark lawlessness, recalling the 2020 federal deployment suppression. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, also a Democrat, held a news conference Saturday saying there's no national security threat, communities are safe and calm, and Portland is not a military target. Her office reached out to the White House and DHS, but got zilch on details. No request for Oregon National Guard either, which would need her okay. The state's mostly Democratic congressional delegation, except GOP Representative Cliff Bentz, sent a letter to Trump, Hegseth, and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, calling it an abuse of executive authority that incites violence and messes with federal-state balance. Rep. Suzanne Bonamici slammed ICE for detaining non-criminals, like a dad at his kid's preschool or a firefighter, citing a Cato Institute report that 65% of detainees have no convictions. Sen. Ron Wyden called it an attempt to incite violence, based on credible reports of replaying the 2020 playbook.
Any support from the Republican side?
Limited but loud. U.S. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez DeRemer, a former Oregon representative and Republican, praised it per BBC for tackling Portland's alleged crime-ridden war zone to, quote, make America great again, end quote. And Tennessee Governor Bill Lee announced federal agents hitting Memphis next week, about 7 days from now, for a crime crackdown, with over a dozen agencies, already drawing protests with signs like, quote, Memphis don't need no occupation, end quote, as PBS and BBC report.
So has anything actually happened on the ground yet? Troops marching in?
As of this morning, September 28th, no large-scale military or federalized National Guard has shown up at the ICE facility, per updates from PBS NewsHour, OPB, The Washington Post, Time, AP News, and Al Jazeera. Mayor Wilson noted a sudden influx of federal agents and armored vehicles yesterday, but the Pentagon's just saying they're ready to back DHS without timelines or unit details. The mission is protecting federal property from alleged threats, but legally, it's murky. Trump didn't invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, which lets presidents send troops for civil disorder without normal limits on military and law enforcement. Instead, it seems to lean on Title X for DHS support, like past ops, but no public proclamation or order spells out law enforcement roles. A recent California federal ruling called his LA National Guard deployment unlawful under the Posse Comitatus Act, which bars federal military from domestic policing without exceptions, and that's under appeal. Oregon's gearing up for court if troops arrive without consent, with Attorney General Dan Rayfield prepping action, citing 2020 Portland challenges.
Wow, a potential legal showdown brewing. And broader worries, like a government shutdown boosting Trump's powers, as House Speaker Mike Johnson calls on Democratic mayors to cooperate.
Exactly, Grace. On the flip side, Portland's actually rebounding. Per OPB and Major Cities Chiefs Association data, violent crime down 17% from January to June 2025 versus last year, pedestrian traffic back to pre-COVID levels, fewer downtown homeless encampments. Residents like 72-year-old Alan Schmertzler and 74-year-old John McNor told PBS it's, quote, disgusting, end quote, ridiculous, end quote, enjoying the sunny fall weather by the Willamette River in a peaceful vibe. Trump's calling life there, quote, like living in hell, end quote, and vowing to do a, quote, pretty big number, end quote, on the, quote, professional agitators and anarchists, end quote. But the reality check from independent journalism is key.
Thanks for that thorough rundown, Ethan, separating fact from the federal fanfare. Welcome back to our morning broadcast. And for our second story today, we're turning to a crisis that's hitting close to home for many Californians: the collapse of federal support for public media. Outlets like NPR and PBS are facing deep funding cuts that could silence local voices across the state. Joining me now is our media correspondent, Chloe, who's been following this unfolding drama.
Thanks, Grace. That's right. As of this morning on September 28, 2025, The unraveling of federal funding for public broadcasting is the top non-shooting story for average folks in California, according to reports from the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. President Trump's push to defund what he calls biased media has led to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB, which manages those federal grants, announcing its shutdown. This means over $1.1 billion in funding gone through fiscal year 2027, as covered by CBS News, Pointer, and Current.org. For everyday listeners, that's like pulling the plug on free, ad-free news and education that reaches underserved areas.
Chloe, walk us through how this all started. What triggered these cuts?
It kicked off with Executive Order 14290, signed by President Trump on May 1, 2025, and published in the Federal Register on May 7, document number 2025-08133, as detailed by whitehouse.gov and analyzed in the Washington Post. Titled Ending Taxpayer Subsidization of Biased Media, it accused NPR and PBS of slanted coverage and ordered all federal agencies to stop funding them. Think of it as Trump saying public media's time is up, outdated and corrosive, per the New York Times reporting from media beat writers like Benjamin Mullen and Michael M. Grinbaum. This attacks the 1967 Public Broadcasting Act, which set up steady federal cash to keep non-commercial stations alive.
And Congress jumped in too, right? How did that seal the deal?
Absolutely. With the Rescissions Act of 2025, Public Law 119-28, passed by the House on June 12 and the Senate on July 16, then signed by Trump in late July, according to congress.gov and ballotpedia.org. It clawed back that $1.1 billion for CPB through fiscal years 2026 and 2027, the first wipeout in over 50 years, confirmed by Senate.gov and govinfo.gov. The New York Times called it part of a $9 billion spending slash, including foreign aid cuts aimed to cripple stations over alleged liberal bias. The Senate Appropriations Committee's fiscal year 2026 bill then zeroed out CPB funding entirely.
So what happened next with the CPB itself?
On August 1, 2025, CPB issued a press release on cpb.org announcing wind-down operations covered by CBS News, Radio World, and Current.org. President and CEO Patricia Harrison said it's a difficult reality, with most of their over 100 staff positions ending by September 30th, just 2 days from now. A small transition team sticks around until January 2026 for final payouts, compliance, and things like music royalties, as noted in Pointer and the Washington Post. Harrison stresses it's not a full dissolution, but a slimmed-down nonprofit close, leaving a tiny door open for revival if funds return. They've already sent out their last $7.1 million in community service grants and shifted satellite funds to a new group called Public Media Infrastructure, causing some tussles over NPR's public radio satellite system control.
Nationally, how bad is this for stations big and small?
The cuts are about 2% of NPR's budget but up to 15% of PBS's, based on historical data from NPR.org and PBS.org. Smaller stations, especially rural ones, without big donors, face huge holes, per the New York Times. A 2011 NPR study projects up to 18% could shutter, cutting off 30% of listeners in the Midwest, South, and West. PBS is trimming 15 to 21% of staff and budgets. NPR's top editor Edith Chapin resigned amid the chaos, and while donations spiked short-term as NPR reported, they won't cover the $535 million gap. There's a $50 million stabilization fund from the Knight Foundation via Current.org, and even NPR founder Bill Siemering, now 91, pleaded in the New York Times to save this unique cultural resource. Stations are in a last-ditch fight, lobbying and begging audiences, with PBS NewsHour explaining local ripples.
Here in California, with over 100 public outlets for our 39 million residents, this must be devastating. What's the local fallout?
It hits hardest in the Golden State, as detailed in LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and LAist.com. Federal funds. About 500 million nationwide yearly, but crucial here, backed news, education, emergencies, and even artist royalties via CPB. Dozens of stations from San Diego to Humboldt County lose millions per OPB.org and WHYY.org, forcing changes despite promises to keep signals airing. Rural spots with spotty broadband suffer most, like Inland Empire or Northern California outlets providing soul weather, wildfire alerts, quake info, and community shows. Time.com warns of irreparable harm, especially for Spanish-language radio bilingue in Fresno, stalled on a $1.1 million grant for transmission upgrades.
Give us specifics on major stations, Chloe. How are they coping?
Take KQED in San Francisco, NPR, and PBS Powerhouse, which on July 16th announced 15% workforce cuts, 67 positions including 45 layoffs, 12 buyouts, and 10 unfilled, hitting content teams hardest, per the New York Times and San Francisco Chronicle. Many left July 18th, their second big slash in 14 months, tied to an $8 million loss, 8% of revenue, gutting local probes on housing and climate. In LA, LAist, formerly KPCC-FM, takes a $3.4 million hit, 4% of budget funding 13 journalism jobs, as in their June 7th LAist.com report, and CBS News, their fundraising for monthly members to save traffic, immigration, and arts coverage. KCRW in Santa Monica, famed for eclectic tunes, and NPR BBC News, expected $1.3 million from CPB, but Current.org and Pointer say no layoffs yet, though cost-saving changes loom, maybe trimming shows like Morning Becomes Eclectic, a punny wake-up call for coastal culture vultures.
And what about more remote areas, like up north?
Rural Keat in Eureka, serving Humboldt's north coast, gets nearly half its budget from federal sources for TV per LA Times and KHSU.org. Current.org notes no staff cut details yet, but it's vulnerable, delivering flood and fire emergencies. Without funds, towers could crumble, and managers in Radio World describe donor scrambles to avoid blackout for thousands, with no alternatives. Overall common cause, and the Washington Post say this widens info gaps for low-income, immigrant, rural folks craving unbiased content in polarized times.
Any hope from legal fights?
Glimmers, but slim. NPR and 3 stations sued May 27th over First Amendment issues and overreach, per NPR.org and AFSlaw.com. PBS followed May 30th via PBS.org. An earlier CPB suit dropped August 1st, per WHYY.org, but these cases linger without blocking cuts, says the Washington Post and Current.org. No big challenges to the Rescissions Act, though Public Media Alliance pushes Congress. In the New York Times' broader view, this fits Trump's media squeezes, like Skydance-Paramount merger or Kimmel boycotts, speeding consolidation. California stations unite in advocacy with listener surges, but Pointer experts predict a transformed, poorer ecosystem without federal ballast. For commuters or families, it's a quieter state as CPB's curtain falls in 2 days.
Thanks for that thorough breakdown, Chloe, painting a clear picture of why public media matters, now more than ever.
My pleasure, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The United Nations has flipped the sanctions switch back on against Iran, with a snapback that snapped into place after a French, German, and British trigger pull. A Russian and Chinese-led delay bid fizzled at the Security Council, clearing the runway for restrictions on nuclear, ballistic missile, and conventional arms activity. Tehran blasted the move as legally baseless, urging others not to play along, while Washington cited significant non-performance of nuclear commitments. The penalties pack asset freezes, travel bans, and an arms embargo, and pack a punch for Iran's economy, where the rial's slide is hitting rock-bottom notes. Yet the E3 and US say diplomacy's door is still ajar if Tehran knocks. A diplomatic dust-up with combustible consequences, The United States has revoked Colombian President Gustavo Petro's visa after he urged U.S. soldiers to disobey Trump's order at a rally outside the UN. The State Department labeled the remarks reckless and incendiary. Petro, already en route to Bogotá, shrugged online, "I don't care," and claimed European citizenship spares him the need for a U.S. visa. The move is rare air in diplomacy and signals relations running on fumes after clashes over anti-drug cooperation, deportations, and Middle East policy. The fallout could sandpaper security ties and scuff economic links between longtime partners. On Capitol Hill, immigration talks are idling in park, waiting for a green light from the Oval. Congressional Republicans say they won't start negotiating a permanent fix for DACA without a signal from President Trump putting dreams on presidential time. With stepped-up enforcement and reports of some DACA recipients detained, advocates warn the window is narrowing while nerves are fraying. House GOP leaders have made it plain: no endorsement, no engine. For roughly 500,000 people brought to the U.S. as children, the policy road ahead remains foggy, part gridlock, part gambit, until the White House waves cars through. Rudy Giuliani has reached a hush-and-rush resolution with Dominion Voting Systems, settling the $1.3 billion defamation suit over 2020 election claims. Court papers say the case is dismissed, the terms are confidential, and each side covers its own costs. No scoreboard, no scorekeeping, just a sealed deal. Dominion, fresh off a headline-making settlement with Fox News in 2023, chalks up another legal win in its campaign against disinformation. For Giuliani, who's already weathered a $148 million judgment to Georgia election workers and filed for bankruptcy, it's one more stop on a costly legal carousel. Less merry-go-round, more money gone round. In Gaza, the conflict's toll continues its grim climb. The health ministry reports 66,005 Palestinians killed and 162 wounded since October 7, 2023, with 79 bodies brought to hospitals in the last 24 hours. International bodies often treat the ministry's figures as broadly reliable, while noting they don't separate civilians from combatants. The numbers arrive on the eve of a Washington meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump, where the war will weigh heavily. As pressure mounts for a ceasefire, the human cost keeps adding commas to a catastrophe: casualties counted, peace discounted, and hope deeply in arrears. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.